the academic world. The academic world already, as compared to everyday life, is already a very strange place to begin with. So it lives on ideology. Like all of science lives on ideas, not ideology in a negative sense, but simply it's all about ideas. So if you bring in an idea that challenges other ideas, of course, it's looked at askance at minimum. But among the general public, this has always been a topic of very high interest around the world, and that we see that very clearly by the way that it's reflected in the entertainment business.
Yes.
So every entertainment type of business, whether it's television or movies or books, is saturated with these topics. Unfortunately, most of it is saturated in a sense of being a horror genre, and which I think is unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that, but that's simply the way that it's expressed. So that would only be there if there is public interest, and we know that's there. We know that scientists are human, mostly. We know that people in government are kind of human, and so the human element is always going to be interested in this. It's expressed in different ways. In the government, and now we're talking about 20 years ago in the United States, there was some interest in seeing if some of these capacities could be used for espionage. And so, I mean, it fits nicely. It's ESP, extrasensory perception, but in this case, it's espionage. And so, very talented clairvoyants were used to mostly spy on the Russians. This was during the Cold War. And every means that was possible was being used to see if you can get intelligence about what was going on, usually in places where other means of intelligence was not working. So if you had a spy satellite and you could look down and see a strange-looking building, and there was no human intelligence in the vicinity, then they would go to this program and say, tell us what's in that building. And actually, they didn't even go that far. In order to keep it completely blind, what was developed was, here is a number. It might be a 10-digit number. Tell us about the 10-digit number. And of course, the number is an association to a target that they know about, but all that the clairvoyant would know, when they're called remote viewers, was the number. The number is linked to something meaningful. So this sounds like an impossible task, but the fact is that in this mental space, that the clairvoyant can get the number and know that it somehow is linked to this meaningful other thing. So their job is to sketch, or to speak, or to somehow convey information about what is inside the particular building. That was successful enough to keep that program going at a top secret level for over 20 years. And it was used by virtually every branch of the intelligence services, most of the military services, most of the other government services in the United States, because it worked. So there you go. On the other hand, it was always classified. And one of the reasons I think in hindsight that it was valuable to be classified is because then, as is now, there's a very high skepticism among actually people in the government and also among scientists that it even exists. So if you think about this, that the strategic value of a method is strongly linked to whether other people think it exists. That's the whole power of a secret. So you have a secret method that works, that's giving information, not 100%, no information source is 100%, but it was usable information, and it was valuable because basically nobody else thought it was even possible.
Really a case of truth being stranger than fiction.
Yes.
Yes? Dean, you've written extensively about phenomena such as telekinesis, clairvoyance. Tell us, are there certain types of people that are better at this, that have certain innate skills at these abilities than others?
Definitely yes. The way to think about it is you could have asked the same question about musical talent or about sports talent. And there is a talent in this realm. Some people are much better at it than others. But again, similarly to music or sports talent, everyone has the capacity to do something. So with practice, with a couple of tips and tricks, there are ways for people to improve their ability. A related question, though, may be, since this is an inherent human ability, it has something to do with sentience alone. Like it's not it's not even necessarily a human ability. It's something about the fabric of reality and sentience mixed together. This is why this works. And it's not magic. It's not, I mean, we might think of it as magic because we don't have an explanation yet, but eventually we will, and then it's no longer in the realm of magic. So it's something about sentience, it's something about recursion, something about the fabric of reality and the entanglement of all things. Some people are just tuned into that to a much greater degree. What happens when people do have that ability? Do they know it? Some do and some don't. So the ones typically who are very successful in whatever field they happen to be in, it might be business, it might be a movie producer, it might be an author, it might be a scientist, they tend to be much, much better, objectively, when tested, at things like precognition and clairvoyance than people who are not so successful. This shouldn't be surprising, because the whole point of many of these kinds of phenomena is that somehow you're able to gain information that is not coming through the ordinary channels. It's not coming through the ordinary senses, it's not something you learned, you're somehow pulling it out of the atmosphere. Obviously, if you're an inventor, that's a good thing to have. If you're a business executive and have to make decisions without sufficient information, it's very important to be able to somehow outguess the future. So there is a study that was done in the mid-1970s among business executives to measure their precognition using a standard precognition test, where they simply had to guess 100 numbers that would later be selected randomly by a computer, and that would then form a precognition objective measure for them. And then that was correlated against the profit of their businesses. And the hypothesis was, well, maybe the reason why some executives are much more successful is because they actually have a little bit of talent in this area, and the correlation should be positive. And indeed, there is a significant positive correlation between the degree to which you can objectively measure precognition in somebody who's making important business decisions and their profit. So that's just in business. In other realms, like in a movie producer is a good example. They're making huge money decisions based on usually on a gut feeling. Like this movie seems good somehow. The producers that are very successful at that will privately admit that they rely very heavily on their intuition, because that's all they have to rely on after some point. And the ones who are systematically making the right choices time after time, they also then privately will talk about their whole range of other kinds of psychic experiences. But again, they don't, in business and in the movies and science, people don't tend to talk about this in public. But privately, there's, I think, more people than we would suspect who know that they rely on their intuition, and they know that that is linked in some way to getting insight and information in ways that don't make any conventional sense, but make a lot of sense when we think about psychic or mystical experience.
The word intuition is an interesting one, because I think there is a little more comfort with that term than many of the other terms that we've spoken here today, such as precognition or clairvoyance or telepathy. Tell me, have you done some studies in the animal realm?
I haven't, but I've had colleagues who have looked at certainly dogs. Rupert Sheldrake's probably best known for doing experiments on whether dogs can sense when their owners are coming home. And his studies show quite clearly that they can do that. But there are other studies using birds, typically parrots, but not exclusively parrots, some cats, some animals like ferrets, all the way down to earthworms have been used in experiments. So in each case, depending on how the experiment is crafted, you can show that it seems to be even a talent among animals. Some animals are better at it than others. So there's some natural capacity that expresses in humans as talent and in animals as different capacities or different levels of capacity. Not all dogs can correctly sense when their owners are coming home, but some of them are superstars at it. So, as I said before, this has something to do with entities that are sentient, that are complex enough, like us and like animals. And the reason why I think all of this works, we use terms like precognition and telepathy. We use those terms as markers or descriptions of the way that the phenomena is manifesting. But that doesn't mean that telepathy is a separate thing. It really isn't, I think. It's simply a way that a phenomenon manifests. The nature of the phenomena we're talking about has to do with the way that information is connected through space and time, ultimately. It's really a physics question. Once the information gets into the organism, it's processed probably by psychology and neuroscience and all the rest. The mystery is, how did information which seems to be beyond the ordinary reach of space-time, how did it get in there in the first place? That's a question for physics. And when you start looking at the deep physics here, you immediately bounce into flexible space-time through relativity, through non-local connections in quantum mechanics. And if you simply thought, well, if we know that the underlying structure of the physical reality has strange connections that span through space-time, then why should we be so surprised that people report experiences like that? And the reason we're surprised is because we somehow think of the deep physical structure as not being where we live. You know, that this seems like hard stuff. This doesn't seem quantum at all. But ultimately, we know that all physicality is quantum in nature. And quantum phenomena, among other things, have a non-local property. Ultimately, you go down deep enough into a physical structure